Hello and welcome to Oil Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasure Plan training. We'll call it SPCC training from this point on. We've got a few goals for getting through the next few minutes of training. We want everyone to understand what an oil spill prevention plan is. We want to go over the potential sources of oil spills on campus, discuss the various oil transfer and delivery procedures that we got to follow, go over some basics on inspecting our equipment and materials that are used when handling oil, and how to respond to an oil spill. This is required by the US EPA. The oil pollution prevention regulations under the Federal Clean Water Act go into very much detail about how to prevent spills by having a written plan. You can find them at the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR 40-112. And the regulations require certain facilities that handle oil to have these written plans. So these written plans establish procedures, methods, and equipment needed by companies and universities and other places to prevent oil discharges into the waters of the United States. So in this case, waters of the United States includes groundwater, includes surface water, rivers, lakes, ponds, and the ocean. The regulations even define what oil is. So it's not just petroleum type oils like diesel fuel and 6-oil and gasoline. It also includes fats, oils, and animal greases, soybean oil. At one time it included milk, but that did get eliminated from the regulation, and other kinds of oils. So silicone oils or mineral oils, that type of stuff. You have to have a plan if you store more than 1,320 gallons of oil above ground, or if you store more than 42,000 gallons underground. Here at St. Lawrence, we exceed both of those for both above ground and underground, so that's why we have to have a plan. And it's also quite reasonable to expect that because we have it on campus, it could spill and get into the water. And we know that that's the case because it happens fairly regularly, despite precautions that we take. So when we go to counting what kind of petroleum we have to include in the plan, it's anything in a container that's more than 55 gallons in capacity. So 55-gallon drums and any size tank, as long as it's more than 55 gallons. I think we do also include the day tank at the heating plant, which I think is maybe just about 50 gallons. It might not be quite that amount, but we include that in our plan as well. Okay. So the plan includes information on what kind of oil containers we have, where the containers are located. It goes into detail on our specific oil handling and management practices. We specify who has different roles and responsibilities associated with handling and storing petroleum. It's got a map that shows where our things are kept. It goes into detail on spill prevention techniques and countermeasures that we would take in the event that we do have a spill. It's a pretty extensive plan. It's many pages long, and you can find a copy. You can get a copy from each of our facilities managers, from Nick Ormison, or from me. And we also have it online. The plans have to be certified by a PE. We use a company called HRP Associates, and they send an engineer every 5 years. We have to review our plan and account for any changes that might have been made for what kind of storage we have on our facility, and any changes that might have been made to how we handle petroleum. And if there are any new tanks added, or if there are tanks removed, we need to amend our plan within 6 months of that change. So the technical amendments have to be done by a PE. We can make our own changes when we have personnel changes. For example, after Dan Seaman retired, Bob Hance became the signatory for our current plan. So the goal is to really prepare a plan that satisfies the legal requirements of the regulation and that you can refer to in the event that you do have a spill or release, so you don't have to kind of wing it on how you do your response and your reporting. And I already told you where to get the plan. And safety and security has a copy. Forgot about that. So our primary facility contact for the federal EPA or the New York State DEC is Bob Hance. He oversees developing, implementing, and maintaining the plan and the oil spill prevention program. This is somebody who is going to identify facility changes where we would be adding or removing tanks in relation to our written plan, and providing management approval signature. And that includes a statement that we're fiscally responsible for doing the work that needs to be done to prevent oil spills. We also have designation of a primary emergency coordinator, and we have several alternates. And at the end of after you've done the video, you can go into the training platform and you can get a one-page list of who our primary coordinators are with weekday and after hours contact information and phone numbers. So the primary coordinator routinely inspects storage and handling facilities, writes work orders to make corrections if we find problems, and involved with setting up and maintaining our emergency procedures, responsible for maintaining records that are required, and doing annual training with everyone who handles petroleum. So yeah, I'm the primary emergency coordinator at St. Lawrence. The alternates include Nick Ormison, Jim Kojan, Marcus Sherburne. I think that's it right now. And Pat Gagnon is responsible for safety and security during an emergency. So that role for safety and security includes controlling access to the area, dealing with crowds, removing people from the spill site, helping with evacuations, and doing traffic control. So those are the roles, responsibilities. We're going to go over what kind of oil is regulated. So every diesel fuel generator has a tank built into it. Those are above ground tanks. So here's an image of the big green one at the Student Center and the blue generator by Brown Hall that is backup power for Johnson Hall of Science. It includes our 6 oil for the central heating plant. There's 2 20,000 gallon underground storage tanks. We also have gasoline and diesel fuel at our fleet shop for fueling up vehicles. I'm just going to go back here. Also at the heating plant is some number 2 oil for running the backup generator, and that's located nearby in another one of those Petra hopper tanks. We also regulate cooking oil and grease at the dining halls, and drums of used and virgin oil in our fleet shop, and also for compressors at Appleton Arena and at the central heating plant. So anything that's stored in a 55-gallon drum or larger. And the plan has a map that shows where each of these tanks, drums are located, and it also includes a map of each elevator that has hydraulic oil. Those hydraulic elevator storage units are also included in our plan. So that's what we have to watch out for. Next, we'll go through some of our preventative measures. So one of the measures is using the right kind of tank to store the petroleum safely. So we use double-walled tanks sometimes to prevent release of oil. The 55-gallon drums are stored on spill pallets. So should you overfill one or it springs a leak in the bottom, the oil will be contained in that pallet. And we do monthly documentation and inspect our tanks and our drums and our piping and our secondary containment. And the idea there is you take a look once a month and you look for rust or holes or fading or discoloration, cracks, all of that type of stuff. And if you do find one of those things, submit a work request and replace the tank or the secondary containment, or maybe paint the tank or whatever is required to keep it in good condition. Another countermeasure is making sure you're locking access and that there's enough lighting so that people can't come in and steal fuel or tamper with your tanks or your piping. And for example, here's a tank in a secondary containment where the concrete is starting to crack. So fixing that and maintaining your equipment is part of our plan. Anytime you fuel or unload, there's some measures to be taken. As far as drivers filling tanks, it's a matter of being at the pump, at the nozzle, and paying attention to what you're doing. When we get deliveries from contractors delivering to our tanks, they're responsible for staying at the vehicle, monitoring the transfer, not smoking, chocking the wheels, making sure your parking brake is engaged, and inspecting the area before they depart after making the delivery. They're also responsible for cleaning up any spills that they might have when they're making the delivery. For our underground tanks, once every 5 years, we bring in Atlantic Testing Labs, and they do a tightness test on the tanks and the piping. They're single-walled steel tanks that were installed about 1960. The next component is training. We have to do training with every employee that handles transfers and is responsible for storage maintenance of our oil handling equipment. So in our case, it's everyone at the heating plant, our grounds crew. We include safety and security because they might be involved with emergency response. And we also include our dining services facilities people. Training's documented and we keep the stuff on record for at least 3 years. So what do we do if there's a release or a spill? First thing we have to do is identify what qualifies as a spill. So anytime you have some oil that spills on surface water and you have a visible sheen or it goes into a storm drain, that is definitely a spill. If you have oil that's leaking from a tank, a drum, or piping, even if it stays in secondary containment, that's a release. If you have a double-walled tank that leaks and the fuel enters that space in between the two tanks, that's a spill. Anytime you spill something during a transfer, or if you fail a tightness test with the 6 oil tanks, all of those are spills. So when it comes time to respond to the spills or releases, for what we call incidental spills, you spill maybe a half a cup or a quarter cup next to the dispenser when you're fueling up your vehicle. Those are things that can be handled in-house as long as it hasn't gone further or you don't have any risk of starting a fire. So we're kind of trained as first responders to do a defensive response to the spill. Our grounds folks and most of our heating plant people have gone through a spill response program in more detail. But the idea is to contain the release and keep stuff from going any further, going into a storm drain or spreading onto soil. And it's really important that if you're in any chance of danger that you step away and call for outside assistance. After you've discovered the release and you've done what you can to contain it, you want to call the SPCC coordinator, me, or Marcus, or Nick, or Bob, to let them know that this has happened. And that's everything, and Jim, and make sure that we're aware of it. And then one of us will determine if the release is something that can be handled in-house or if we have to call out for a contractor. So we're going to go and look at some past spills, and you'll see that our grounds folks are the ones that do the heavy lifting here when it comes to doing cleanups, at least the spills that have happened lately. So we have kits in several different locations. They're usually, I think all of our spill kits are in some kind of yellow drum or yellow can. The one on the top is an overpack. It's an 85-gallon overpack drum. So there's one at the mezzanine of the central heating plant. There's one at the fleet shop. We have one at the golf course pump house by the Little River. There's one at the golf course equipment shop. We have one in Bucas Hall hazardous waste storeroom. And we've got bulk speedy dry stored at Kreiderman Hall. They're in bags on pallets. And we have a small one in the Appleton Arena compressor room. So the idea with these smaller spills is to shake down some speedy dry or absorbent booms on the perimeter of the spill area, and then work your way in to soak up the rest of the oil that's inside the puddle. And we do have a couple of these storm drain blockers. So I'm going to have you do some homework afterwards, which is to go out and find your drain blockers. There should be some in the heating plant. There should be one at safety and security in the patrol car. And there are a couple of magnetic ones. I think there's one magnetic one over at the fleet shop stuck on the side of the either the gas or the diesel tank. So your homework is to go out and find those and make sure they're still there. And if you can't find one, let me know and we will locate it for you. So you just want to use the magnetic ones. Will stick to the metal storm grate, and the triangle one shapes, they just kind of stick to the ground around it. Okay. So bigger spills that might have off-campus impact or that are too big to handle with our small spill kits, or if we have a gasoline spill that's more than, let's say, 20 or 30 gallons, we're going to need some outside help from the fire department and or our contractor. So the supervisor of whoever the outside emergency response is, so that would be the fire chief of the state police or the county hazmat team, will act as the incident commander. The smaller spills that can be handled in-house, the incident commander would most likely be safety and security. If we have outside help, we go to the incident command system, and they're in charge. And then we would get in touch with US Ecology, and they would come with their response team, their vac truck, their trained personnel, and their spill responders to help. Okay, notification is really important for keeping us in good graces with the DEC. So any spill that's on the ground or in the soil or on the water has to be reported right away to the New York State DEC. Larger spills will eventually need to be reported to the EPA, and we'll go over what criteria requires a call to the EPA. There's an exception to reporting, and that's if you have less than 5 gallons of oil released onto land, then specifically pavement or concrete. And you can do the cleanup within 24 hours. You don't have to do the response. But if it's outside of that, we have to report it to the DEC within 2 hours of discovery of the release. And those phone calls will be made by me or Nick or one of the other coordinators or Bob Hance. You're also going to want to follow up with a phone call to safety and security so that they are also aware of the spill. Okay. So these are the phone numbers. The sheet that is included in the training materials in this training website will include the contact information for making the phone calls to the EPA. Any spill that's going to hit the Little River or the Grass River will need to be called into the EPA as well. Okay, so besides just petroleum and oil spills, we do have other chemicals on hand at St. Lawrence, and there's a whole list of them in our written SPCC plan. If we spill more than a certain number of gallons or pounds of other chemical materials, those may need to be reported to the EPA also. And I can't think of any off the top of my head. Since we don't have ammonia anymore, that's not a possibility of spilling it into an amount that would have to be called into the NRC. But there are certain refrigerants that would need to be called in, and some of our more toxic chemicals that we might have here in the chemistry department may also require a phone call. Any spill that threatens human health, the first thing to do is call safety and security, and they will in turn contact Canton Fire and Rescue or the police, depending on the extent of the emergency. If we have a spill that enters the sanitary sewer, that needs to be a phone call to our Village of Canton Department of Public Works, so that the people at the wastewater treatment plant know to expect that they may see some material coming down to the wastewater treatment plant. If we spill more than 1,000 gallons of oil, or if we have 2 spills within a 12-month period of time of 42 gallons or more that go into the water, we have to prepare a written report and submit it to the EPA. That would be my job. Okay. So if we do have a spill, we have to make sure that it's contained and cleaned up as soon as possible, that we decontaminate the impacted area, typically by removing soil, sucking out water, and occasionally doing a steam cleaning, that we properly dispose of the waste materials, and that we do all of the reporting as required to our state and federal regulators. Okay. So as far as security goes, places that we store and use oil and chemicals have to be secured so that people can't just kind of wander in and cause havoc. The rooms and buildings where the materials are stored are going to be locked. Tanks are going to have their fill ports locked if we can't actually put a fence around the tank. And dispensers, fuel dispensers, are going to be key card or key access only. And our safety and security officers do routine rounds, and in part of doing their rounds, they're also going to be checking on these areas where petroleum and oil are stored. We do have an addendum for construction projects. So when we have a contractor bring on any kind of petroleum in a container 55 gallons or larger, they have to complete their own plan and submit it to us for review and for implementation. Contractors have to report any spills that they encounter to SLU, in addition to making their own calls to the New York State DEC or the EPA. And they have to describe what they're going to use to mitigate a spill or do a cleanup. Okay. So our last part of this training is to go over some recent spills. And we've had a few in the past year and a half. July 1st, we had a hydraulic fluid spill with the Toro lawnmower. There was a break in one of the hydraulic lines. The driver didn't realize that had happened and drove the mower back to the barn, as it were, and left this little strip of hydraulic oil on the pavement. And our great grounds guys came out with their speedy dry, spread it on a little line, and used the sweeper to sweep it up. A year later, we had another hydraulic fluid spill from the big, I think it was the big Toro. And in this case, it was another hydraulic line that had failed. The lines, I think, had rubbed together or degraded and blew out in the process of mowing the grass. And it made a pretty good strip, pretty wide strip, and it probably lost about 30 gallons of hydraulic fluid. We did have to have some help with that, and I think we had about 28 cubic yards or 28 tons of contaminated soil and speedy dry to dispose of. Another spill was discovery of an abandoned tank at Brown Hall in June during a little what was supposed to be an fairly easy construction job. So in this case, we didn't. Jim Gibson discovered a petroleum tank that had been probably a heating oil tank for when this was Canton College, and they had their garage here. And there had been some leaks either from the piping or from the tank itself, that the oil leaked underneath the tank and into the ground. So there was a pretty big hole there, and we brought in US Ecology to help with identifying the extent of this contamination, doing some soil sampling, and ultimately writing a report. And we were able to close the spill after removing all the contaminated soil. So that's the content today. Make sure that you go in and take a look at that one-page list of emergency response numbers and the list of responsible people. There's a copy of the whole SPCC plan also in the training materials, so feel free to take a look at that or take a look at the hard copy that is kept by the various supervisors, safety and security. And if you've got any questions or concerns or can think of any follow-up that you know needs to be done at any of our petroleum storage locations, contact me or Nick. And I thank you very much.